Welcome to Middle East Now. I'm your host, Bianca Zanini. Let's begin with tonight's headlines. Gazans take to the streets again in the second day of rare protests against Hamas. Lebanon's prime minister says nobody in his country wants normalization with Israel. And Israel loses 4-2 to Norway in FIFA World Cup qualifying match. Desperate and frustrated Gazans took to the streets in a second day of rare protests against Hamas. Hamas terrorists, Hamas out, and we want an end to the war. Those are just some of the chants ringing out in demonstrations across northern Gaza in what appears to be the largest protest wave against the terror group since its attacks on Israel in 2023, as Gaza's residents plead for a government overhaul. More in this report.
As the Gaza death toll surpassed 50,000 on Sunday, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry, a message was shared on social media calling for 9 anti-Hamas demonstrations across Gaza. Home to 2.1 million people, Gaza fell under Hamas control in 2007 after an election and brief civil war with Fatah, a rival Palestinian faction that is the backbone of the Palestinian Authority. In a rare occurrence in the Strip due to the terror group's often violent suppression of political dissent, hundreds of Palestinians protested Tuesday against Hamas rule and against the war in at least 3 locations. Northern Gaza in particular has been hit hard by the military offensive Israel launched in response to the October 7th attacks, and 17 months of war have reduced much of the area to rubble. Residents of Beit Lahia in the northern Gaza Strip called for an end to the war and an end to Hamas's governance, with some demonstrators carrying signs reading "Stop War" and "Children in Palestine want to live." Hours after the first protest, another demonstration was held in northern Gaza's Jabalia refugee camp, with dozens of demonstrators burning tires and chanting, "We want to eat." As news of the protests spread, other demonstrations broke out across Gaza, including one in the southern city of Khan Yunis, where protesters were filmed chanting, "Down with Hamas," and calling for an end to the fighting. Others chanted, "Where is the press? Where are the journalists?" Hamas did not officially comment on the protests, but some media outlets in Gaza published photos and videos from the events under the heading "Demonstration for Stopping the War," without mentioning the calls for the terror group's downfall. While there have been more public statements by individuals in Gaza against Hamas rule since the war started, large-scale demonstrations against the group have been almost non-existent. But these protests are expected to continue throughout Wednesday.
The people of Beit Lahia are people of peace. We demand peace and security for this city. We say no to tyranny and for the setting this city on fire. We decide, and we will decide, who will rule this city. Everyone must stand together to confront any external factor that interferes with the fate of this people in everything related to killing and displacement. We all say yes to peace, no to tyrannical rule that threatens the future of this people. Enough destruction, enough war. We want to live. All of us together, we want to live.
And joining us in the studio this evening is security analyst Jonathan Regev and I-24 News correspondent Billy Sladin. Jonathan, let me start with you. How big of a deal are these protests, really?
I'm not sure they are. We have seen in the past instances of protests in the Gaza Strip. Hamas is very strong still, despite a year and a half of war and despite the constant strikes by Israel. Hamas is still strong enough in the streets. And Hamas, we know that as soon as the humanitarian aid comes into Gaza, it takes control of it. Therefore, it controls the daily life. It controls the economy by deciding how much of the humanitarian aid to release to the market and how much to keep to itself. It also controls the prices. Therefore, I don't think, and I know that Israeli officials also do not think that this is something major. Is there discontent in Gaza from the Hamas rule? Absolutely. That does exist. But is it something that can actually threaten and jeopardize Hamas ruling the Strip? I think the answer is no. I think that if it comes to be something that is big enough and just a little bit threatening, then Hamas has the ability and has the power to simply shut this down. We have seen such instances before, and I don't think as big as a discontent may be in Gaza, I don't think this is something that can really jeopardize the rule of Hamas on the Strip.
And how do you see Hamas responding to this, if at all? I mean, they may let it pass, ignore it because it's not going any further, or they might have a reaction to it.
Well, until now, we see that they're not really cracking down on the protesters, although a source told I24 News Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran today that Hamas is preparing to use excessive violence against the protesters, and they're asking for protection for the protesters in this day. Maybe if it gets wider, Hamas will need to address this some way or another. Currently, Israeli security officials are saying that this is an important crack in the public support for Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and they are suggesting actually that Israel should continue with the pressure in order to increase the anger against Hamas. Other words for saying continue with the airstrikes, continue with the evacuation orders, maybe evacuate the people from the north to the south once again, which could lead to more anger toward Hamas. That could lead to some sort of uprising. Some people are already calling it an intifada against Hamas. Others are calling it even the Gazan Spring, other words for the Arab Spring. So we see there is something that is starting, but I do agree with Jonathan here. It doesn't look like, or at least we can't know whether that will continue this way or not. For now, we, of course, need to keep an eye on that.
Right. So keeping an eye on it, the Israeli media, of course, is reporting on this very intensely, international media as well. How is the Arab media covering it?
Well, it depends, of course. It depends to which country the media belongs. If we look at the Saudi media or other, quote-unquote, moderate Arab countries' media, we see that they extensively reported this and also stated clearly that this protest is against Hamas. Al Jazeera ignored it at least yesterday, but I haven't seen at least yesterday posts on it on the social media of Al Jazeera. Today, they did mention that there is a protest against the war. They are framing it differently. They did not mention Hamas specifically. But in recent hours, at least one reporting in Al Jazeera did mention that some people did chant against Hamas. This is very important. Apparently, they can't ignore it any further. But it's more important also to focus on Palestinian media, like Al Shahab Agency, very close to Hamas, of course. They are, quote-unquote, warning of these protests and calling it Israeli propaganda and driven out of the narrative of the enemy. That's what they are saying. We also, of course, get into some internal Palestinian politics here. They're accusing the protesters of being Fatah activists or the rival of Hamas. So it's more on social media as well. If you are in support of Hamas or Hezbollah or the quote-unquote Iranian axis of resistance, you would call these protesters as traitors, or maybe some would call them Fatah members, as we said. But if you oppose the Iranian axis, you would definitely say this is the righteous voice of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip.
All right, and the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, in just the last few hours, took the opportunity to address these protesters and shared this message to the people of Gaza.
The IDF will soon operate forcefully in additional areas in Gaza, and you will be required to evacuate and lose more and more territory. The plans are already ready and approved. Learn from the residents of Beit Lahia. Demand the removal of Hamas from Gaza and the immediate release of all Israeli hostages. This is the only way to stop the war. Residents of Gaza, the IDF will soon operate forcefully in additional areas in Gaza, and you will be required to evacuate for your own protection from the combat zones. The plans are already ready and approved. Hamas is endangering your lives and will cause you to lose your homes and more territory that will be added to the Israeli defense system. Sinwar I destroyed Gaza, and Sinwar II is ready to burn half of Gaza with his own hands just to try and preserve the rule of corruption of himself and his fellow Hamas murderers and rapists. They and their families are sitting protected in tunnels or luxury hotels with billions in bank accounts abroad, and using you as hostages. Learn from the residents of Beit Lahia. As they did, you too will demand the removal of Hamas from Gaza and the immediate release of all Israeli hostages. This is the only way to stop the war.
Now, a message like this from Israel to the Gazans, how is it likely to be received?
Same as before. The Gazans will probably, those who have been ordered to leave their homes will leave their homes. The evacuation orders, we've seen them for nearly a year and a half now. Do I think that we'll see Gazans going out to demonstrate because the Israeli defense minister told them to demonstrate? I seriously doubt that. None of this comes to say that I believe and I agree that there's discontent in Gaza due to the rule of Hamas. Does that mean that now the Gazans will suddenly join the Zionist movement and adhere to the Israeli defense minister? I would guess no.
All right, it could even have a counter-effective
maybe even
response. All right, now earlier today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned that Israel would intensify its pressure on Hamas if the Palestinian terror group refuses to release hostages still held in Gaza. Let's take a listen.
We are changing the face of the Middle East. The fighting in Gaza continues. The more Hamas persists in its refusal to release our hostages, the stronger the pressure we will exert. I say this to my colleagues in the government, and I say it to Hamas as well. This includes the seizure of territories, along with other measures I will not elaborate here.
And we go now live to our correspondent, Robert Swift, who joins us from the IDF headquarters, outside the IDF headquarters, where Israelis are protesting, calling for a hostage deal. Rob, what can you tell us from the ground?
Yeah, indeed. We're here once again for a protest outside the IDF's HQ. Now, you can see and hear behind me that the protest is once again taking place. Though I have to say, the protest here is a little bit smaller. Last week, there was a tent encampment here, which has now been moved. I'm going to step aside so my cameraman can show you a bit of the protest, which continues. And the protest taking place here to our front, it seems around about 30, 40 people. This is the kind of protest that has been taking place here regularly. And as you can perhaps hear and see from the signs and the chants, the people here are calling for an arranged agreement between the Israeli government and Hamas in order to get the hostages out of the Gaza Strip. Now, this is not the only protests that have been taking place around the country today. There was also extensive protests in Jerusalem, where protesters indeed set up a mock Qatari embassy, complete with a mock-up of the Prime Minister. On top of that, opposition lawmakers even they said that they would no longer conduct their business inside the Knesset, because in their words, the Knesset is no longer it's no longer connected to the Israeli people, they say, and so they are holding their offices out in the streets. Now, all this comes as there remains an impasse in the talks between Israel and Hamas. The big question on, is Israel leaning towards using military force in order to get the hostages out, in order to complete its war objectives, and has it given up on talks? With regards to that, Egyptian sources said earlier today that essentially that the talks were at an impasse, that there was no room for maneuver between the Israeli and the Palestinian side. However, an official from Hamas, Bassam Naim, he has contradicted that in the last hour or two. He said that talks are ongoing and that no one will accept a situation in which there can be an agreement and then the fighting would continue afterwards, after the hostages have been released.
All right, Robert Swift, thank you for those updates. A lot still going on there. Thank you. Now, back in the studio with me, I want to ask you, Billy, since you're here in the studio with me, to give a little bit of more in-depth update on what's going on with these talks, because we are seeing these protests, we've seen the resumption of the war, and yet there's still efforts going on and to reach some sort of diplomatic return to a ceasefire. Where do we stand with this right now? What's Israel's latest response?
Yes, well, first of all, what Rob has mentioned, the statement by Bassem Naim, for example, a senior Hamas official, I don't know what he's talking about. There is no negotiation right now. Maybe things are happening in the background between Hamas and the mediators, but nothing indirectly is happening between Israel and Hamas on any specific agreement. We know, according to the latest report, that Israel rejected the new Egyptian proposal, although that some of the Qatari newspapers did say that Hamas did give a positive response. Positive is not agreeing. Could be that Hamas did agree to that, but we're not sure. Maybe Hamas wants to show the Gazans that are protesting right now that we're still talking about a ceasefire agreement, but they are framing it in a way that Israel is rejecting it because Israel wants to get its hostages back and resume the war. He knows what's on stake here. It's Hamas's presence in Gaza. It's Hamas's arms in Gaza. That's what is important. Now, Israeli officials insist that they did not get any new proposal, and they also insist that Israel will not accept anything less of the Witkoff outline. We're talking about 10 living Israeli hostages. Why is that? The Trump administration is backing Israel while it continues its war. The fear in Israel, if they sign a temporary ceasefire agreement, that would be at least 2 months, for example, with the release of some of the Israeli hostages. The Americans will start getting offers from other regional players, Qatar, Egypt, everyone that wants to end this war. That goes against Israeli interest. For example, a permanent ceasefire or a long-term truce, as Hamas wants 5, 10, 15 years truce. That's something that Israel doesn't want, and they're saying, the Israeli officials, that if we want to go to any temporary ceasefire, it needs to be in exchange for at least 10 living Israeli hostages. That will, of course, be beneficial for Israel. Unless Hamas agrees to such a thing, the war will only continue and the pressure will mount on Hamas.
Right, so we can expect to see, at least the way the situation stands right now, a continuation of this resumption of the war. Stay with us. An Israeli company called Combatica is bringing virtual reality into the training of IDF special forces to hone soldiers' abilities under real lifelike combat conditions. Shani Gidalia from I24 News' French channel reports.
On the battlefield, every second matters. Special forces must be ready to react instantly to unpredictable threats. But how do you train for the unexpected? The answer might be found here, in this high-tech training facility, where virtual reality and artificial intelligence are revolutionizing military preparation.
At first, this looks like an ordinary room, but in few minutes, it will transform into a super realistic battlefield using Combatica's virtual reality technology. The goal? To expose these special forces soldiers to real-world scenarios without the real-world danger.
The training begins. Equipped with VR headsets and dummy weapons, these soldiers are plunged into a fully immersive environment. Every detail is designed to replicate real-life combat situations, hostage rescues, ambushes in urban warfare, or rescuing their comrades for a booby-trapped building.
אנחנו נכנסים פנימה, חוליה שלי נכנסת ולוקחת שמאלה, חוליה השנייה נכנסת ומתחילה מצד ימין. פצוע! פצוע! ירי מדרום! פצוע! ירי מדרום! יורים עליי!
But this is not just a prescripted exercise. Thanks to artificial intelligence, each scenario evolves in real time based on the soldiers' decisions. The enemy adapts, exploits weaknesses, and reacts dynamically. Mistakes don't just happen, they are analyzed and corrected immediately.
לנו מאוד מאוד חשוב לאמן את היכולת קבלת החלטות של הכוח, בדגש על הפיקוד בכוח, על ידי זה שאנחנו זורקים אותם לתוך סיטואציות מאוד מאוד מורכבות, שנדרשות בתקשורת גבוהה מאוד בין כל חברי הצוות כדי להצליח. וקבלת החלטות נכונה של הסגל הפיקודי.
Each session is followed by a detailed debriefing. AI records and analyzes every movement, every shot, every tactical decision made during the virtual mission. Once the exercise ends, soldiers can review their actions in real time, pinpoint mistakes, and optimize their responses.
קיבלו כדור כי חשבו שהם מחבלים, היה פה דוץ. היה פה דוץ בגלל שזוג הלך לבד, בלי לעדכן את יתר הכוחות, בלי שהמפקד ידע. בתחילת האימון בעצם הם תקשרו בצורה לא נכונה. חלק מהחיילים הסתערו קדימה כשאחרים נשארו מאחור, ונוצר מצב של ירי דו צדדי. במהלך האימון, אחרי שתרגלנו וראינו מה קורה כשאין תקשורת טובה, הם מאוד שיפרו את התקשורת.
The technology developed by Combatica could mark a turning point in elite unit training, more flexible, more immersive, and more cost-effective than traditional drills. It allows soldiers to prepare for the unexpected with ever-evolving scenarios.
Faster, more intensive, and more effective way to train. This technology is revolutionizing military training because in combat, every second counts.
With virtual reality and artificial intelligence, special forces are pushing the limits of military training, a total immersion for battle-ready preparation.
Increased geopolitical risks, a polarized political system, and elevated social tensions. Uncertainty over Israel's longer-term security and economic growth prospects are much higher than usual, warns the Moody's Investors Service, warning of a weakened economic and fiscal strength. Joining us to talk about this is Dr. Alex Cohen, economy expert at the Tel Aviv University. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Pleasure.
The first question has to be, how concerning is a report like this, a warning like this?
From 1 to 10, 9.
That's very concerning. Why?
Yes. Because this budget is, the concept today is that together we can win, and I think that this budget is very divisive in the sense that you can see how a serious part of the population and the important part which contributes is completely ignored, is treated like a cow that you milk as much as possible. So all the excitement about high-tech, they say we have a fantastic economy, let's slaughter it. And the part that does not contribute is getting all the cream. I would think about the Israeli economy as a train where the locomotive is the high-tech, which has all these fantastic exits. And then you have the rest of the economy, and then you have a huge rock that we're dragging behind. And this rock is growing as you look at it. So it's really concerning.
All right, and how is this going to impact regular Israelis, and how soon?
So in the near term, the impact is going to be, we're going to lose one salary in terms of the standard of living. We're going to lose one salary in terms of our income, and we're going to get significantly less services because hundreds of millions of dollars are going to flow outside to service the debt because we are in a deficit. You're going to see huge amounts of money, of tax money, going outside to foreign banks. So this is in the near term, this is going to be very bad. And also the religious minority, if we're talking about the group that is not part of the economy, is not going to join the economy. In the long term, you're going to see growth choked because then there's no motivation, there's no investment in things that are going to grow the economy.
All right, and how much of a surprise is this, really? Is this something that we could see coming?
Absolutely. When you saw the rating agencies, Standard & Poor, Moody's, and Fitch reduce our rating, the assumption was that they were just anti-Semites and that they should be ignored. But actually, they should not be ignored because they saw that the Minister of Economics, Smotrich, is very sectorial. He's only looking at his interests in order to keep the coalition together and ignores it. And if you say what I just said today in Israel, you're considered to be just somebody who hates the government. So what we did is we took the budget and we fed it into ChatGPT. And we told ChatGPT, what can you see in this budget? And that's exactly what it said. We see no elements for growth. We see a very significant burden on the economy, on the people who actually work, which is you and me and the people in the studio. And there's no consideration for us. So it's very segregated. The people who contribute are going to be squeezed. The people who do not are going to be pampered. And that's the opposite. For instance, one example I'll give you is the education.
Right.
When I pay for somebody's education, I do this as an investment. I pay for that education because I anticipate that in the future they would be part of the working force and I would charge them taxes. So it's going to benefit me in the long term. Right. If I remove money from the education system that makes people capable of generating value because they know English, mathematics, physics, computers. And I shift my budget to people who only know how to pray to God, who do not contribute to the economy. This is a big, big mistake.
And really, for those of us hearing this and thinking, well, what can I do? What can we do?
We can pray to God.
We can join them.
Yes.
The ones who pray, join them.
Please, please, please do something to save us, because this government does not care about us at all. And it's not just the budget, it's also the days of military service that people do here as reserve soldiers, and it's going to hurt the economy even more.
I have to ask you, we just have 1 minute left before we head out, but is there any positive in all of this? Is there a way out?
A way out I do not see, but if I really try to find something positive, it's the fact that Smotrich refused. I mean, we have low-cost housing, and the Minister of Low-Cost Housing, which is part of the religious, extreme religious minority, he dedicated 25% to soldiers. And the Minister of Economics, he insists that it's be increased to 50% or this project will be eliminated. So I think this is just fair that the people who carry the burden, who are under the stretcher, as we like to say, should get benefits, whether it's in housing, taxing, etc., versus the other population.
All right, so little steps forward tiny steps forward in a major step back.
Yeah.
All right. Alex Coleman, thank you very much for that concerning analysis. Now, we do have to go out for a quick break, but Middle East Now continues in just a few minutes with lots more news and analysis to unpack. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Dance, music, and magic immerse you in the story of Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem, an unforgettable musical where the past and present meet. Welcome to the heart of the most sought-after city in the world. A unique experience only at Kikar HaMusika. Reserve now at thisisjerusalem.co.il.
Bad posture. The ever-increasing hours we spend sitting, working, and even while trying to relax at home is twisting our vertebrae out of alignment and creating strain and pain on muscles, ligaments, and joints. A scientifically designed spine and back support device that uses precision biometric technology to perfectly align the back and spine for all-day comfort and support, creating perfect posture for your back every time you sit down. Now features extra-wide acupressure comfort pads as well as an extended height back panel for even more support, making it perfect for all body types. Also features a precision wing design that perfectly cradles your back and spine with amazing ergonomic support that leaves you feeling refreshed and energized even after sitting all day.
Welcome back. You're watching Middle East Now, and I'm your host, Bianca Zanini. Nobody in Lebanon wants normalization with Israel. That's what Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said earlier today in a meeting with journalists, adding that the presence of Israeli forces in 5 points inside Lebanon have no military or security value. The U.S. has been pushing Beirut towards a larger agreement with Israel, but according to Lebanese media, officials there say that this would be more of a ceasefire deal than actual normalization. Now, joining us to discuss this is David Daoud, Hezbollah and Lebanon Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for joining us this evening to discuss this. So we've got the new government in Lebanon, the new government in the U.S., but we've also got the resumption of the war in Gaza. Is normalization between Lebanon and Israel really that impossible, or is it just too soon to talk about right now?
Well, I think it's not realistic to speak of it now or at any point in the near future. The rumors came through a leaked comment seemingly by Prime Minister Netanyahu to Channel 12 that then made the rounds. But if we're looking realistically, the teams that have been formed, the negotiation teams that have been formed, don't deal with normalization. No U.S. official has really said that they're trying to push towards normalization. And from the outset, Lebanese officials were saying this just isn't on the table, culminating in Prime Minister Nawaf Salam's comments today, ostensibly putting an end, or at least aiming to put an end to this rumor that very likely started because Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to distinguish his deals with Lebanon, his border demarcation with Lebanon, from former Prime Minister Lapid's, who, when that happened over the maritime border negotiations, Prime Minister Netanyahu accused him of making a deal with Hezbollah and ceding territory to Hezbollah. So now Prime Minister Netanyahu seems to be saying, no, my deal, my border demarcation deal, is different.
Right. Well, so you're saying that perhaps the conversation then should be less about normalization because it's just not realistic at this moment, and more about reaching this border agreement and then take it from there.
Well, I think, look, I may be very unpopular in saying this, but I don't think Israel benefits anything from normalization with Lebanon. If anything, the relationship would definitely not be mutually beneficial. There's no security cooperation that Lebanon could offer Israel. There's no defense cooperation. There's no economic cooperation. There's no research and development cooperation, unlike the other Abraham Accords countries. If anything, allowing Lebanese to enter Israel with Lebanon in its current state could pose a major security risk for Israel, as we saw with workers, guest workers, who were allowed to come in from the Gaza Strip into the Gaza envelope, who were then, whether they were well-intentioned or not, used by Hamas to gather intelligence on these border communities. What's to say that Hezbollah or other actors that still remain in Lebanon couldn't do the same? What Israel needs from Lebanon now, and what would satisfy the needs of both countries, is for Lebanon to abide by its obligations under international law, under subsequent international instruments like Resolution 1701, bilateral agreements like the 1949 Armistice Agreement and the recent ceasefire deal, disarm Hezbollah, control your territory, and no acts of hostility should cross the border in either direction. That's what's needed.
Right, you're talking about what should happen, but that's also not that close. There are still many steps from there. And I want to ask you, when you're saying that Lebanon, normalization with Lebanon wouldn't have any immediate or any positives for Israel, I mean, couldn't a normalization agreement with the Lebanese government weaken Hezbollah and then from then on make it a strong case for Israel to want that?
That the weakening of Hezbollah could happen without such a normalization agreement is my point. If Lebanon were to abide by its default obligations under international law, it would do so. That would weaken Hezbollah. And then once Hezbollah is weakened, once other malicious actors that use Lebanon as a playing ground from which to harm Israel are weakened, then we can talk about normalization. I mean, let's look at the scenario of what does normalization mean? It means Israelis visiting Beirut. Who's going to guarantee their security? And who's going to guarantee that Lebanese who come into Israel for visitation purposes, for work purposes, even under the best of intentions, aren't used by malicious actors in Lebanon to gather intelligence on Israel to harm Israel? So start with disarming Hezbollah, start with controlling your country, and then Israel should talk about normalization. But at this point, where Lebanon still doesn't even have full control over its country, where we're not even seeing the most minimal moves against Hezbollah.
Right.
To talk about normalization is very premature.
All right, so let me ask you about that. Where does Hezbollah stand in all of this at this current moment?
On the normalization issue specifically, or its situation in Lebanon?
The situation inside Lebanon.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, Hezbollah is obviously severely weakened by the recent war in Israel, but it's not down for the count. They're trying to find a path to regeneration. And they're trying to demonstrate, like right now, what their goal is not to reconstitute their strength to be able to fight Israel. It's to muster enough strength to be able to demonstrate to the rest of the Lebanese, its opponents, the government, that disarming Hezbollah by force, that not taking its interests into consideration will lead to potentially civil war or some kind of destructive conflict within the country or some kind of security concerns in the country, meaning they're trying to make themselves too strong to digest in Lebanon. Right now, what Hezbollah is trying to do is demonstrate we still have the strength. With Nasrallah's funeral, according to Information International, this is a Lebanese consultancy group, they mapped the area where the people stood, and they said that something like 600,000 to 900,000 predominantly Shiites came to the funeral. This is a demonstration by Hezbollah of its strength in the country. It's a message to other groups to say, you cannot come after us without our consent. You cannot do anything without our consent. Now, Hezbollah has withdrawn to some degree north of the Litani, although we still see strikes against Hezbollah south of the Litani. And the LAF has moved into areas where Hezbollah's forces have vacated. But again, that's been done with Hezbollah's consent. The question is what happens when Hezbollah says no. And even in the policy statement of the Nawaf Salam government, there was a line, seemingly a throwaway line, about a national defense strategy, discussion over a national defense strategy. Because of Hezbollah's weight, the other political factions, the government is going to have to take Hezbollah's opinion into consideration about what happens with a national defense strategy. And that could lead to Hezbollah either being integrated in some way, its arms being sanctioned officially by the state, or something like the 2016 PMF law that we saw in Iraq, which allowed these PMF militias to maintain their cohesiveness, maintain their independence, but still be a part of the apparatus of the state and get funding from the state. So it would allow Hezbollah to have its cake and eat it too. I think that's where Hezbollah is trying to go now.
All right, David Daoud, thank you very much for that analysis and update. And still with me in the studio is security analyst Jonathan Regev and I-24 News correspondent Billy Sladin. Is normalization with Hezbollah is not in Israel's interest right now? That's what we heard. Your thoughts?
Of course, generally speaking, normalization would be in Israel's interest, but that's a very good point. What can Lebanon offer Israel at this time? It's not, we're looking at the Abraham Accords and trying to go along with them. The Abraham Accords are with the UAE and Bahrain, two very wealthy countries, two countries that are stepping forward in so many fields, such as science and education and economy, and you name it. So they have a lot to offer to Israel, and Israel has a lot to offer to them. What can Lebanon offer Israel? It's a divided country. Let's say that in some miraculous way the Lebanese state was able to curb Hezbollah, and let's say that Hezbollah is no longer a military force, only a political force. Will then Lebanon come to peace? The answer is no. There would still be Shias and Sunnis and Christians and Druze. It's a very, very divided country, just like neighboring Syria. So can it offer a lot to Israel? The answer is no. Israel, of course, would be very happy to have peace with its northern neighbors, and I'm sure that Israelis would love to go to Beirut. I heard it has beautiful beaches, and the ski resorts in Lebanon, I hear, are great. But what can Lebanon offer generally to Israel? Not much. So Israel, I think, is looking for stability, quiet on the northern border. Will Israel rush into normalization with Lebanon? I think no, simply because Lebanon does not have anything to offer to Israel, clearly, when we compare it with the UAE, for example, with Dubai, with Abu Dhabi.
All right, and let's normalization on the side for a moment. Lebanon and Israel have proven to be able to reach an agreement, the maritime agreement in 2022, the border agreement that they're working on right now. Is this an important step to actually get the two countries closer and weaken Hezbollah?
Well, definitely yes, because after all, Hezbollah is taking this as an excuse for their existence. Because Israel is quote-unquote occupying some parts of our land, that's why we need to exist to resist Israeli occupation or Israeli aggression, as they call it. So that's one step forward, of course. Now, I do agree, of course, with anyone that talked here about the impossibility of reaching some sort of a normalization agreement with Lebanon for now. But the Americans are pushing for something else, maybe less than full normalization, but it's more like a non-aggression pact. Maybe that will open some sort of security coordination between Israel and Lebanon to curb Hezbollah, and Lebanon could also lead to some sort of economical cooperation as well. That's something that could be happening, but I think not in the near future. That's not going to happen in the near future. The Americans, by the way, Witkoff's deputy, Morgan Ortagus, is going to arrive to Lebanon in the coming weeks after Eid al-Fitr in order to follow up with the implementation of Resolution 1701. But there is more here, because she's going to discuss with Lebanese officials also the implementation of Resolution 1559, which is the complete disarmament of Hezbollah. That's according to some Lebanese newspaper, Al Mudun. They said that that's what's going to be on stake when she arrives to Lebanon. That's definitely something that would be very, very significant for Israel and for the future possibility of any normalization with Lebanon.
All right, Walid Sladin and Jonathan Regev, thank you both very much for your input and analysis this evening. Jonathan, you mentioned Syria and Lebanon, and Lebanese defense minister has delayed his visit to Syria, and rising violence within Syria is threatening the hope for a safer, unified country after the ousting of former President Bashar al-Assad. The United Nations Special Envoy for Syria on Tuesday spoke to the UN Security Council about the latest developments in and concerns for the country, including the presence of Israeli forces. More in this report.
Following clashes between Israel and local residents in southern Syria, which killed 6 people on Tuesday, UN Special Envoy for Syria has condemned the Israeli presence in the country's buffer zone.
February and March saw several incidents of reported Israeli airstrikes in southwest Syria, Damascus, Homs, and the coast. The IDF has also publicly confirmed it has built multiple positions in the area of separation, which are a violation of the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement. Such facts on the ground are not easily reversed.
Geir Pedersen also addressed the attack that happened on the coast of Syria, where armed terrorists, who are affiliated with Damascus, went door to door to kill members of the Alawite minority. The Syrian Network for Human Rights says over 800 people were killed, but other groups say that number is even higher.
The appalling civilian death toll, including widespread summary killings of civilians and unarmed individuals, including accounts of entire families executed at point blank, and widespread footage of grave violations of a plainly sectarian and retaliatory nature.
So there will be a constitutional committee that will be appointed. Extremely important that that committee is representative of all Syrians, all communities are part of it, and that the new social contract that will then be developed will learn from the process that we have now and what I call best international practices.
Pedersen said Syria is at a, quote, crossroads, but the Western world might be blinded by the prospect of a stable Syria instead of the reality on the ground.
We move now to East Africa, where Egypt and Ethiopia are fighting for influence in a concerning development in the region. Egypt supporting the central government of Somalia, having signed a defense pact, Ethiopia having signed a memorandum of understanding with the breakaway autonomous region of Somaliland in order to get port rights on the Red Sea. Now, Egypt and Ethiopia are in a long-standing conflict over water resources. More than 60% of the Nile's waters originate in Ethiopia, which has been building the Gerd Dam, giving them significant control over the water that Egypt receives. Now, the defense agreement between Egypt and Somalia has analysts worried that the low-simmering conflict could boil over. Now, joining me in the studio is I24 News senior producer Alex Schloss to discuss it. So, all right, Alex, this is about access to water, to the Nile, to the Red Sea, but the tensions between the two main players here, Egypt and Ethiopia, could easily spill over to something larger, and there are more countries involved in all of this.
Absolutely. So when you look at the conflict between Ethiopia and Egypt at the moment, it actually originated in 2011 when Ethiopia started construction on this Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is an existential threat as Egypt sees it, because you said 60% of the Nile's water flows through Ethiopia, but 90% of Egypt's freshwater resources come from the Nile River. So if Ethiopia is able to block that water access, then Egypt's in some serious trouble when it comes to agriculture and other uses for its freshwater sources. So you also have other players like Eritrea and Sudan somehow involved in this, right? But it's because that Ethiopia is a landlocked country in the Horn of Africa, and it sees access to the Red Sea as a major priority for itself. And in order to gain that, it has caused some divides between Egypt and Ethiopia, with Egypt siding, as you said, with the Somali government in Mogadishu, and Ethiopia moving towards de facto recognition of the breakaway region of Somaliland, signing a memorandum of understanding, a step towards getting that Red Sea port access that it so desires.
All right, so it's about access to water, but what we're seeing now is a defense pact agreement and talks about forces potentially having access. How concerning is this development, and how much of an escalation is this, if you'd call it that even?
So I wouldn't call it quite an escalation, but it's rather a continuation of a conflict that's been around for the better part of a decade. The conflict around the Grand Renaissance Dam is static at the moment, but the issue is that other conflicts have emerged from this tension that was sparked during the construction of the dam in 2011. So now you have Ethiopia announcing last week that it will not invade, it will not go to war with Eritrea in order to gain access to a Red Sea port. So it's other options that it's left with. It's either going to Sudan, which is in a state of civil war and hard to reach deals with no functional government there to cut a deal with. So you have Ethiopia now going to Somaliland, while Egypt has sent reportedly thousands of forces already to Somalia to take part in a peacekeeping mission to combat Islamist groups like Al-Shabaab and ISIS. But the fear is, from the Ethiopian perspective, that these troops pose a threat to Ethiopia's security, that Egypt might use this as a pretext or as a force multiplier to threaten Ethiopia, and even potentially encourage the different clans and the different sectarian groups within Ethiopia to further Egypt's own interest in the Horn of Africa.
All right, and just one quick question here, because we're running out of time, but we know that Turkey has also been involved, mediated talks between Ethiopia and Somalia, which of course is supported by Egypt. What's Turkey's interest here?
Turkey is not so much interested in expanding its influence in Africa per se, but it is trying to establish itself as a diplomatic powerhouse. You've seen Turkey become a mediator in the war in Russia and Ukraine. You've seen them try to mediate other conflicts. You've seen them play both sides when it comes to different conflicts in the Middle East, even in Syria and the Assad regime. But yeah, Turkey is trying to establish itself as a major diplomatic player in this region.
All right, Alex Schloss, thank you very much for your analysis.
Pleasure.
Now, Yemen's decade-long conflict has left more than 4.5 million children out of school, with violence and poverty disrupting the education of many more. Now, charities in Yemen are picking up where the state no longer can. With more, here's our correspondent, Robert Swift.
For over 10 years, Yemen has been ravaged by war, leaving 4.5 million of the nation's children out of school and disrupting the learning of many more.
My children stopped their studies for 6 months when the conflict broke out. Then we were displaced from the war zone to Taiz. Actually, I thought about leaving the conflict zone and moving to a safer area so they could continue their studies.
During war, education is often the first service to fail and the last to be restored.
Before the war, the situation was good, life was peaceful, the schools were good. Now the situation has deteriorated. Schools, buildings, hospitals have been destroyed.
Continued access to education during a crisis can foster a sense of normalcy, boosting psychological resilience in children.
At my first school in Taiz, there was shelling nearby. There was fear, so we relocated to this school so we could continue learning.
Without continued access to school, a whole generation could be impacted, with knock-on effects for Yemen in the years to come. To prevent that, the charity Global Partnership for Education is operating in Yemen, where it has provided millions in grants to support education.
GPE has stood by Yemen throughout the conflict. Fundings of over $125 million has helped rehabilitate destroyed schools, provide students with psychosocial support, school supplies and school meals, pay teacher salaries, and strengthen local capacity to provide education.
Students have also received psychosocial support to help them cope with war-related trauma. But while the violence rages on, children's education will continue to be disrupted.
And we move now to the world of sports. Israel lost 4-2 to Norway in yesterday's FIFA World Cup qualifying match. And meanwhile, the Palestinian national soccer team is one step closer to reaching their first FIFA World Cup finals with a dramatic comeback yesterday, beating Iraq 2-1 in a game in Amman, Jordan. Also yesterday, a Tunisian student was arrested for storming a stadium and waving the Palestinian flag during a 2026 World Cup qualifier in the capital, Tunis. He also tore down banners in support of Israel before being taken into custody. Tunisia, of course, has seen several protests against Israel and the war in Gaza. Now, joining us to talk about this and more in the studio is Ori Levy, a journalist and founder of Baba Goal. Let's start with the Palestinian soccer team.
Yes.
How big of a deal is this?
It's a massive victory, an historical one, the first time ever Palestine is managing to beat Iraq in football, and also a real opportunity for Palestine to maybe get the the second ticket for the fourth round of qualification to the World Cup, after that they lost to Jordan 3-1 last week, and it seemed like their way and their dream to be in 2026 World Cup in the US, Canada and Mexico is over. On the 97th minute to score such a goal, and you know, surprisingly enough, the player who scored the goal is Amid Mahajne. He's from Al-Fahim, and until last year he was playing in Israeli second division, and basically he's an Israeli citizen that decided to join the Palestinian team, and later on, after a successful Asian Cup with Palestine, he moved to play in Qatar. So I would say it's also an important and a pinnacle point for Palestinian football in terms of their participations in the World Cup qualifiers, but also for the connection and the importance of Israeli citizens within the Palestinian national team. Also, it's a massive moment for Amid Mahajne in France.
All right, and seeing that Israel had its loss, the Palestinian team had a win, for soccer fans who are there for the game, how much of a concern is it that politics or war from real world situation could spill into the game?
Yeah, I think we are already used to it, yes, here in Israel. And usually when Palestine wins in Asia, Israel tend to lose in Europe, but not only because Palestine is maybe more successful at the moment in their confederation, just European football is much more difficult and higher level than Asian football. So it makes more sense that Israel will lose when it's playing against better rivals. You know, politics, whether we like it or not, it's part of the game. And it became an integral part of the game in 2022 when FIFA and the Olympic Committee, the International Olympic Committee, decided to ban Russia immediately after the first days of the Russian invasion to Ukraine. And this moment, you know, politics became so well integrated into sports that, you know, I'm quite surprised that we are in 2025 and we are still speaking about Israel competing and trying to reach the World Cup themselves. I think it's good for us. It's good for our case internationally.
Do you see that changing?
Not really. I don't see it changing for the simple fact and truth that eventually Israel was attacked on October 7, and something that Russia cannot say for its defense. Whether things will change, we live in a crazy world. Obviously, things will happen now and then. But for the Palestinians, obviously, they love this victory. It's a remarkable one, especially after the worst days in Gaza in the past, I would say, couple of weeks. For us, we didn't come with any expectations for this window. We are not looking to qualify for the World Cup. We think if it will happen, it will be a miracle. We are aiming for the Euro in 2028. That's it.
Let's see what happens, all right? Uri Levy, thank you very much for your insight.
Thank you.
Now, that's all for this evening's broadcast. But Middle East Now is back tomorrow with more news and analysis from the region. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for watching. I'm Bianca Zanini.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are? Introducing i24 News' brand new news website. On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the i24 News app today.
How do you get your news? How do you know what sources to trust? And to paint a clear picture of the entire story, you need a breakdown of the constant stream of events, top stories, expert analysts, and the best journalists bringing you real voices on the ground. We're breaking it all down on The Rundown. Get the facts, stay informed, and be a voice of reason for the Middle East.
A major turnaround, protest action and widespread unrest inside Gaza against Hamas. Thousands of Palestinians lambasting the rulers of the Gaza Strip, accusing the terror group of stealing aid meant for civilians. The response will be swift. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group fires rockets out of Gaza towards Israeli civilian areas. One rocket is intercepted, the other lands in an open area. The IDF warns Gazans to vacate those rocket launch areas ahead of likely strikes. And in the United States, new claims in a controversial deportation case involving Colombia University graduate Mahmoud Khalil. The pro-Palestinian activist is accused of being a Hamas sympathizer, and now it's alleged he hid information in his application to become a U.S. resident. We go live to New York. This is the rundown on I24 News. I'm Benita Levine. A significant turning point in the war, or is it? Thousands of Gazans taking a stand against Hamas, demanding that the terror group end its rule of Gaza. Local clan leaders in the southern part of Gaza issuing a statement calling for a popular uprising on Wednesday. Protesters in different locations slamming the current conditions, accusing Hamas of stealing aid and selling it at exorbitant prices. Some demonstrators are calling for protection from Hamas amidst widespread unrest. More in this report.
As the Gaza death toll surpassed 50,000 on Sunday, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry, a message was shared on social media calling for 9 anti-Hamas demonstrations across Gaza. Home to 2.1 million people, Gaza fell under Hamas control in 2007 after an election and brief civil war with Fatah, a rival Palestinian faction that is the backbone of the Palestinian Authority. In a rare occurrence in the Strip due to the terror group's often violent suppression of political dissent, hundreds of Palestinians protested Tuesday against Hamas rule and against the war in at least 3 locations. Northern Gaza, in particular, has been hit hard by the military offensive Israel launched in response to the October 7th attacks, and 17 months of war have reduced much of the area to rubble. Residents of Beit Lahia in the northern Gaza Strip called for an end to the war and an end to Hamas's governance, with some demonstrators carrying signs reading "Stop War" and "Children in Palestine want to live." Hours after the first protest, another demonstration was held in northern Gaza's Jabalia refugee camp, with dozens of demonstrators burning tires and chanting, "We want to eat." As news of the protests spread, other demonstrations broke out across Gaza, including one in the southern city of Khan Yunis, where protesters were filmed chanting, "Down with Hamas," and calling for an end to the fighting. Others chanted, "Where is the press? Where are the journalists?" Hamas did not officially comment on the protests, but some media outlets in Gaza published photos and videos from the events under the heading "Demonstration for Stopping the War," without mentioning the calls for the terror group's downfall. While there have been more public statements by individuals in Gaza against Hamas rule since the war started, large-scale demonstrations against the group have been almost non-existent. But these protests are expected to continue throughout Wednesday.
The people of Beit Lahia are people of peace. We demand peace and security for this city. We say no to tyranny and for the setting this city on fire. We decide, and we will decide, who will rule this city. Everyone must stand together to confront any external factor that interferes with the fate of this people in everything related to killing and displacement. We all say yes to peace, no to tyrannical rule that threatens the future of this people. Enough destruction, enough war. We want to live. All of us together, we want to live.
And still with the story, Israel's Defense Minister Yisrael Katz sharing this message to Gazans in recent hours. Take a listen.
The IDF will soon operate forcefully in additional areas in Gaza, and you will be required to evacuate and lose more and more territory. The plans are already ready and approved. Learn from the residents of Beit Lahia. Demand the removal of Hamas from Gaza and the immediate release of all Israeli hostages. This is the only way to stop the war. Residents of Gaza, the IDF will soon operate forcefully in additional areas in Gaza, and you will be required to evacuate for your own protection from the combat zones. The plans are already ready and approved. Hamas is endangering your lives and will cause you to lose your homes and more territory that will be added to the Israeli defense system. Sinwar I destroyed Gaza, and Sinwar II is ready to burn half of Gaza with his own hands just to try and preserve the rule of corruption of himself and his fellow Hamas murderers and rapists. They and their families are sitting protected in tunnels or luxury hotels with billions in bank accounts abroad, and using you as hostages. Learn from the residents of Beit Lahia. As they did, you too will demand the removal of Hamas from Gaza and the immediate release of all Israeli hostages. This is the only way to stop the war.
And earlier in the day, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group firing rockets out of Gaza, red alert sirens sounding in several southern communities. One rocket was intercepted, the other landing in open areas. There were no injuries. Later in the day, the IDF ordering the immediate evacuation of certain neighborhoods in Gaza City, the launch site of those projectiles. The IDF's Arabic language spokesman publishing a map of the area that had to be evacuated, saying it was a final warning before the IDF carries out strikes over there. And now for more, it's a pleasure to welcome Palestinian security analyst Mohammed Najib. He joins us from Ramallah in the West Bank. Thank you so much, Mohammed. We're looking at powerful images on this day showing Palestinian protesters at various locations in Gaza chanting slogans against Hamas. Many of them are young protesters. Is the tide turning? What do you make of all of this? What is your sense of what is happening inside the Strip right now?
Yes, actually, some Palestinians believe that those protests came too late. They should protest against Hamas ruling Gaza and destroying their lives since a long time. But those protestations forms an unprecedented dangerous threat for Hamas security control over Gaza. And the protesters call for the end of Hamas governance in Gaza that started and lasted since 2007 right now. So that make the life of the Palestinian hell and miserable for 2.3 million Palestinians who live in those catastrophic conditions, and are 80% of mass displacement, shortage of food, clean water and medicine, thousands of victims and missed under rubble. So that's a big problem over what they can absorb, and that was started yesterday. So the people of Gaza believes that as long as Hamas ruling Gaza, no Arab and no international country will be ready to pay $1 single to reconstruct Gaza and keep them live in this hell.
The protesters are taking a major risk, no doubt about it. What kind of response would you expect to see from Hamas right now?
Yeah, in limited protest in 2019, Hamas shot the foot of the demonstrators, but this time they tried to ignore. Yesterday they tried to disperse some of the demonstrators, but those demonstrators threw Hamas security by stones, and Hamas keeps silent. They try to ignore that. Today they convey the message to the Israeli people, to the Israeli public, says that the life of the hostages is in danger. But I think they are considering how to handle this demonstration. Actually, Hamas surprised and shocked by that. They didn't expect that to happen. And also the people of Gaza believes that Hamas has lost the opportunity to end the war when they didn't cooperate with Witkoff and the American proposals to end the war and to turn the hostages to Israel. And they thought that as the United States opened a direct channel with them, that means the Israelis will not go back to the war again. But they miscalculate the Israeli reactions, and when the war and when the Israeli military campaign resumed in Gaza 8 days ago, the people start angry against Hamas and take Hamas accountable and responsible for the continue of their sufferings.
And how then, Mohammed, is this being viewed from inside the West Bank? Hamas has much support there, even more so since October 7th. What is the sentiment on the ground there like, given these defiant images that we are seeing in Gaza?
Yeah, actually, the people of the West Bank not support Hamas because Hamas ideology. They support or sympathize with the people of Gaza, the civilians there, and because they're attacked by Israel. It's not because of the Hamas ideology. And I think yesterday I saw on the social media and today, there is a lot of asking Hamas to listen to the people and to what they think, because the sufferance continues and lasted for more than 17 months right now, and there is no horizon. So as long as Hamas ignore them and keep gifting the victory to the Khamenei of Iran and sacrifice Gaza and keep the people suffering for external agendas, that make the people angry. Today they were called for protestation to show support here for the people in Gaza, in Ramallah and other areas. But on the social media, we witness how much the people are angry and sympathize with the Gaza people that sufferance lasted for 17 months right now.
And how then does this all impact the question of the day after? Realistically, who would be in charge of the Gaza Strip after this war? Your thoughts?
No, but whoever will be responsible, the Palestinian Authority, Arab League or Arab countries or leadership, local leadership from Gaza. But what is confirmed and seems certain right now that Hamas has no future to rule Gaza, as the people of Gaza don't want Hamas, and the international community, the Arab countries, the Palestinian Authority don't want Hamas to be in governance in Gaza. So I think that is a real threat and the first sign of Gaza spring against Hamas to call for its double down.
Fascinating times indeed. Always appreciate your insights. Thank you so much, Palestinian security analyst Mohammed Najib, live from Ramallah in the West Bank. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now for more insight, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio Dan Perry, international affairs analyst, author of the newsletter Ask Questions Later, and the former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press, and security analyst Jonathan Regev. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for joining us. It seems like potentially a pivotal moment in the war. These Palestinian protesters at various locations in Gaza taking a stand against Hamas. Dan, you've been covering this region for a very long time. Your thoughts?
From the beginning, 2007, when Hamas took over Gaza, Israel and Egypt slapped on a blockade, hoping for a rebellion among the Palestinians, assuming there's a rational, logical connection between their suffering and their displeasure with Hamas. That never materialized. The policy has been a complete failure over 17, 18 years for a number of reasons. One of them is that Hamas runs one of the world's most brutal police states. Another is that anger towards Israel was real, genuine, deep, radical hatred of Israel that represents and aligns with Hamas ideology was very real. Now, however irrational and radical you might be, the suffering that the population has endured under Hamas because of Hamas since October 2023 is stupendous. Tens of thousands of people killed, entire cities lying in ruins. I'm not surprised that the opposition that there always was is now stronger. And I wouldn't be indifferent to the courage of these people. It was only a few hundred yesterday, a few thousand today. It doesn't seem like that much in a territory of 2+ million people, but I think we need to remember a few thousand people in Gaza protesting against Hamas, which has a habit of shooting the protesters in the legs or worse, is equivalent to hundreds of thousands in Israel, or millions in the U.S. So this is not insignificant. Will it be enough to cause Hamas to turn tail? Clearly not yet, but if it grows and grows, maybe. The wider context is that Hamas, understanding this is coming, has already made statements to the effect that they're willing to cede power in Gaza. However, they're not willing to disarm. The actual debate right now is going to be over disarmament of Hamas, and that won't be so simple at all. And what needs to happen is tremendous societal pressure among the Palestinians for Hamas essentially to surrender and surrender their arms. And for that to happen, much as I'm pleased to see the defense minister finally saying clear words directed at the Gazans, it would be better if the Arab League and Arab countries said it, and if the Palestinian leadership said it. And it would be better if the Palestinians were given a very clear choice of not just something less horrible if Hamas steps aside, but something genuinely good. And despite that irrationality is very strong at this point in Palestinian society, I hate to say it, not only in that society, but it's strong in Palestine. because of the trauma, I think that would have an effect. And if you see polls and everyone senses a reality where 90% of the people want Hamas to disarm, that may be the pivotal moment.
Jonathan, is quite something not only to see the number of protesters inside Gaza taking a stand against Hamas, as we're discussing. It comes at enormous risk, but also to hear the Israeli defense minister urging Gazans to keep taking a stand against the terror group. Your take?
Yeah, it's true, but I'm not sure it may not have a counter effect, because just like Dan said, even among those protesting, the hatred towards Israel is genuine. They're out there in the streets not because they're going to join the Zionist movement anytime soon, but because they're discontent with Hamas. There's a very clear difference between discontent with Hamas and alliance with Israel. These are two completely different things. And if anybody expects that these protesters will now align with Israel because they're discontent with Hamas, the answer is no. And if anyone thinks that these people will take to the streets because the Zionist Minister of Defense told them to do so, the answer is no. Therefore, it's not as if they will align with Israel. And perhaps even if this brings some kind of a change, even if something changes in Gaza, I think we can perhaps compare it with the change that we saw in Syria. One regime, which was terrible for Israel, is gone. Another regime is in. Is that regime good for Israel? Not so sure. So these people protesting in Gaza, is it remarkable? Absolutely. Is it something that perhaps Israel wants to see happening more and more? Absolutely. Will they bring the change? Not so sure. And even if they bring the change, is it something that would be favorable for Israel? Clearly not sure.
Well, I have to say that regarding the Syria analogy, indeed, we don't know which regime is worse for Israel. But in this case, I am actually confident, which is rare to be confident about something optimistic in the Middle East, that whatever comes after Hamas would indeed be better. It's hard to imagine anything equally as bad. Now, as for Israel Katz and his statements, he made threats. They're not going to listen to him because they're allying with the Zionists, but they might be listening to his highly credible threats that they will lose more of their homes if they don't get rid of Hamas, with the implication that they will stop suffering if they do.
It's true, but the question is that Israel has been threatening them for a year and a half now, and the evacuation orders, we know that they do listen to that. Whenever evacuation orders were given, they moved away. But will they listen to the Israelis because the Israelis want to see Hamas away? I'll be very happy to see that, but I'm not sure it's going to happen.
The difference maybe is that Hamas is weakened. They may have replenished some of their order of battle, but they don't have the same weapons. They don't have the same wider support in the Arab world. And I think, to a degree, the felicitous protests that we're seeing reflect a declining fear of Hamas. And there's good in that.
There is good in that.
The other question that remains is, does this embolden the argument for military pressure inside Gaza to continue? And we will take a deeper look at that in a short while. But right now, we go to the latest protest action in Tel Aviv. Calls for a deal that secures the release of all 59 hostages still in terror captivity. 24 of the hostages are believed to be alive. We now go live to our correspondent, Robert Swift. He joins us from Tel Aviv. And Rob, we know time is running out for the 24 living hostages inside Gaza. They've been held in terror captivity for nearly 18 months now. Families urging leaders to secure a deal. At the same time, we're discussing here in studio, the military pressure continues. What are people there saying? Tell us more.
Yeah, so the people behind me, they are very clearly making their message heard, and that is that they believe that military pressure is not an option, that they think it endangers the hostages, and that a deal should be reached for between the Israeli government and Hamas. Now, the protesters behind me, I'm going to step aside so you can see a bit more of them. They've just, in the last few minutes, closed this road that you can see. This is one of the main highways through the centre of Tel Aviv. It's not the first time tonight that this road has been closed. The protesters are periodically opening it and allowing traffic to pass. Just a few minutes ago, the police had to intervene when one motorist, he decided he'd had enough and he wasn't going to wait for the protest any longer. Some of the argument I could hear, clearly he had different political opinions to the protesters. A reminder that much of Israeli society might stand with these protesters, but just as much is against it, stands with the government and believes that military pressure is necessary. So the police here put that individual back in his car and nothing too dramatic happened. But there, a sense of the split opinion within the Israeli public. There are plenty of people here who agree with the government. They feel that the only way to deal with Hamas is to continue attacking them. And that debate we're seeing here in real time in the streets of Tel Aviv.
That debate continues, no doubt about it. Rob, what then is known about the diplomatic efforts? We know about proposals out of Cairo. We know about the pressure out of Washington, not to mention moves out of Doha. What is the latest on the diplomatic front?
Yeah, from the Israeli officials today, we very much had the impression that the direction they're leaning towards is full pressure. From statements from Defense Minister Israel Katz, also from statements that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made in the Knesset today during debates. Both of them reiterated the argument that Hamas, unless it releases hostages, unless Gazans expel Hamas from the Gaza Strip, then Israel will take territory from the Gaza Strip. At the same time, we do hear reports coming out of Egypt. Qatari media reported Egyptian sources saying that they had said to Hamas, who they're in connection with, that essentially the negotiations are at standstill. It's going nowhere. The last Israeli delegation that was in Cairo as part of those talks, that was last Saturday. Nothing's happened since then. Hamas put out a statement a little bit later this evening where a Hamas official, Bassem Naim, said basically Hamas remains open to talks and in his words, they are flexible on any kind of talks that would end the war. As he said it, there's no point having talks, releasing hostages and then going back to fighting and dying afterwards. Obviously, that's not what Hamas wants. The issue, of course, is that the minimum that Hamas are offering, that they will release hostages if the war is to end, that's simply not enough for Israel. So for the time being, the protests continue and the airstrikes in Gaza keep going.
Correspondent Robert Swift in Tel Aviv. Appreciate the update. More to come from Rob, of course, in the coming hours. And over and above the protest action in Tel Aviv, also demonstrations in Jerusalem on this day as well, once again. And now, talking of political developments, it's one of the most crucial positions in the Israeli security echelon. Benjamin Netanyahu's office has today reportedly started interviewing replacements for Shin Bet head Ronen Bar, who is being dismissed because the Prime Minister no longer trusts him. 4 candidates have been summoned for the position. Israeli media reporting the possibilities include 2 former deputy heads of the security agency and a former top official, Shalom Ben Hanan. Another candidate, Eyal Tzir Cohen, a former division head in the Mossad and a security researcher, will meet with the Prime Minister when he returns from abroad, according to the latest reports in Israeli media. Jonathan Regev, the impact of this position, not only the controversy over the impending dismissal of Ronen Bar, but what it means when it comes to replacing him at this stage in the war.
I think it's terrible to replace such a high-profile position at this stage in the war, not because Ronen Bar should not be replaced. He should, because just like the heads of all of the security branches, whether it's the army, whether it's the Shin Bet, whether it's everyone else, he should be replaced because everybody failed on October 7th. The army, the Shin Bet, even the Mossad, everybody failed. Having said that, is this the right time to do it? Should it be happening now? Is there really a breach of trust between the Prime Minister and the head of the Shin Bet? If there is, then why did the Prime Minister wait for a year and a half since the war began? These are questions that have to be asked. Regarding replacements, all of them, as you mentioned, there are people that grew up in the organization. They come from the ranks of the organization, and same could be said, for example, for Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir. He was a high-ranking officer within the army, a former candidate for Chief of Staff, not someone that was brought from outside. same as the people that you're speaking about here. There are people from the organization. They're not brought outside. The main question that the Israeli society is asking itself is, are these people going to serve the organization or going to serve the men who appoints them? I think that's the main issue. If two of the candidates were deputy chiefs, then they're obviously qualified men. If they arrived to such a high position in the organization, obviously they're qualified. Who will they serve? The organization or the people appointing them? That is the main question, I think, being asked. 1 minute till the break. Dan Perry, your thoughts?
Netanyahu says he doesn't trust the head of the Shin Bet anymore, but the story here is that very many people in the public don't trust Netanyahu to not appoint a head of the Shin Bet who he tells in advance must be loyal to him personally. It's obviously a very bad look when the first Shin Bet chief to be fired is the one who is investigating Netanyahu's inner circle as we speak over the Qatar scandal. But the bigger picture, of course, is that the Shin Bet failed so spectacularly on October 7th that if it was a prime minister and a government that had the trust of the people not to do such a thing as part of a wider authoritarian overhaul, then probably it would go pretty smoothly, despite the fact that there is a war. But at the same time, as the Shin Bet chief is being fired, they're trying to fire the Attorney General of Israel. And she is a very major player in the array of gatekeepers that prevent the executive in Israel from doing whatever it wants, including, arresting anyone named Benita. Like, it's the courts and it's the gatekeepers that keep the rule of law going, and there is a sense that the government is at war with that concept.
Political divisions internally. Meantime, the existential threat remains. Gentlemen, stay with us. We've got so much more to discuss right now. A quick break. When we get back, the Houthis claim they have targeted U.S. warships and an aircraft carrier in the Red Sea, plus military targets in Israel. Stay tuned. The rundown continues.
Now, more than ever, we are all joining forces at the front lines and the home front in medicine, technology, research and development with hope. And together strengthen the Negev. Ben-Gurion University, the University of the Negev.
Dance, music, and magic immerse you in the story of Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem, an unforgettable musical where the past and present meet. Welcome to the heart of the most sought-after city in the world. A unique experience only at Kikar HaMusika. Reserve now at thisisjerusalem.co.il.
Welcome back. Our coverage continues. The Houthis have today claimed they have targeted U.S. warships and an aircraft carrier in the Red Sea, as well as military targets in Israel. The group's military spokesman in Yemen saying their missile forces, drones, air force and naval forces carried out a joint military operation targeting the warships. In a separate operation, it's claimed that their drone air force targeted Israeli military targets in Tel Aviv, a claim that might well come as a surprise to many Israelis. The IDF saying a missile launched from Yemen overnight disintegrated during its flight. Take a listen.
During the past hours, the missile forces, the drone air force, and the naval forces carried out a joint military operation targeting hostile warships in the Red Sea, primarily the American aircraft carrier Truman, which serves as a launching base for aggression against our country. The confrontation and engagement lasted for several hours. And as of the time of this statement, the armed forces continue to actively confront the aggression and responsibly address various developments and emerging situations within the operational area. In solidarity with the oppressed Palestinian people in Gaza, and in continuation of our support for them, the drone air force targeted Israeli military objectives in the occupied Jaffa area earlier, using several drones. By the grace of God, the operation successfully achieved its goals.
The operation successfully achieved its goals. Still in studio, Dan Perry, international affairs analyst, and the former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press, and security analyst Jonathan Regev. Jonathan, a success in the eyes of the Houthis, but Israelis didn't even know about this apparent launch towards targets in Tel Aviv.
True. It's true that there were no sirens overnight, but if I remember correctly, it was Monday night, Monday at about this time, 8 p.m., when millions of Israelis rushed to shelters. So the Houthis need one missile. They don't need, and they don't even need that missile to hit anything. We know that the missiles fired from Yemen, they're intercepted way outside Israel's skies, somewhere over Jordan or over Saudi Arabia, way before they even arrive. So yes, no casualties, no damage, but again, the sirens are back. Did any Israeli really miss that, running to shelter in the middle of the night, or just in broad daylight, just running to shelters once again? No. So as far as the Houthis, that is success. I don't know how long the Houthis can go on with this now that we do see a major difference between the Trump and the Biden administration when it comes to dealing with the Houthis. We see quite a strong operation now, which we didn't see before during the Biden administration. Having said that, the Houthis are still firing.
Very briefly, the strategy of the Houthis, Dan, given the ire of the Trump administration and the global coalition. Of course, this is all impacting global shipping.
Well, yeah, I mean, the real issue is less the attacks on Israel, annoying though they may be. I think in the entirety of the war there was one casualty. Terrible. But what the world sees is that a third of global container traffic has been impeded heading up to the Suez Canal in Egypt, a country that can ill afford it, losing billions in hard currency canal revenues. The Houthis probably cannot be persuaded to cease and desist from their aggression. And if you want to handle this, then they have to be deprived of their ability to fire, both fire missiles at Israel and fire drones and other projectiles at these boats. Essentially, the question is, are the Americans really prepared to continue their 12-day offensive until the Houthis basically surrender? I fear that may require a degree of destruction in Sana'a and in Yemen that will test the indifference of even the Trump administration. But I was such a huge critic of the Biden administration's tolerance of this that I think we can only hope for success on the part of the Americans.
Talking of the Americans, stay with us. We're turning our focus right now because U.S. intelligence is in the spotlight, not only because of the embarrassing group messaging mistake earlier in the week in which a reporter was added to a U.S. administration group discussing U.S. military plans in Yemen. It's also in focus because the 2025 annual threat assessment has been released. It's the intelligence community's official evaluation of a range of threats to American citizens, the homeland, and U.S. interests across the globe. The assessment shows that Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea individually and collectively are challenging U.S. interests in the world by attacking or threatening others in their regions. So for the latest, we cross live to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. He joins us from the White House in Washington. So, Mike, good to see you. No surprises in the U.S. assessment of the threats posed by Moscow, Beijing, Tehran and Pyongyang. But what is the assessment when it comes to the Middle East, specifically Gaza and Yemen, which we've been discussing here in studio?
Well, many of those countries that you mentioned there, they're tied together. A note on the Houthis, as Jonathan and Dan were talking about a moment ago, the ability for them to keep firing. Two pieces of news. One from today at the White House, they announced that the drone chief, the chief of the drone unit for the Houthis has been eliminated, along with a deputy and several other members of that sector. Meanwhile, the intelligence report that you spoke about lists a number of partners that the Houthis have been working with to broaden their ability to strike, to broaden their arsenal. Among them, Russia and Russian companies. Also, Chinese defense companies were listed in that intelligence report, along with al-Shabaab and some Iraqi Shia militants. So the Houthis are going to great lengths to broaden their reach and broaden their arsenal, utilizing some of those countries that you mentioned at the top of this segment here. Meanwhile, for Gaza, for Hamas, the intelligence report paints a bleak assessment, saying that there's still thousands of Hamas fighters remaining, that much of its underground infrastructure remains intact, that it's still capable of fighting at a low-level guerrilla warfare style at this point in time, and without a game plan, without a day-after plan and a plan for reconstruction in Gaza after the theoretical elimination of Hamas. There really is no bright spot to look at here in the medium and long term, according to this intelligence assessment. Meanwhile, while Hamas might be declining in popularity in Gaza, according to the intelligence community assessment, their popularity in Judea and Samaria, in the West Bank, and the Palestinian-controlled territories there continues to rise. Another problematic spot in that assessment.
And Mike, when it comes to the northern front, what is the assessment of the threats out of Lebanon now that Hezbollah is largely decapitated, and out of Syria as well now that Bashar al-Assad's regime has fallen and there is a new uncertain sheriff in town at the helm in Damascus?
Well, in terms of Lebanon and Hezbollah, the intelligence community assessment does note, yes, Hezbollah has certainly been dethroned there, but not out of the game yet. There is still concern among the intelligence community that Hezbollah has the ability to wage warfare, not just against Israel, but against U.S. interests, both abroad and here on the homeland. It mentioned as well, though it didn't paint any specific pictures of threats. But the biggest problem for the intelligence community in terms of Lebanon and Hezbollah would be the loss of the ceasefire that's currently in place, because of very fragile new government that's backed by the U.S. If we go back to war again between Israel and Hezbollah, everything that's kind of been built in terms of the new government and any kind of stability, if you want to call it that, that's been there over the last month and a half, could fall by the wayside very quickly. So the U.S. making sure it's going to great lengths to keep that ceasefire intact. We've seen visits, and there'll be more visits by White House and other national security officials there to Lebanon in the coming days and weeks. Meanwhile, you mentioned as well Syria. Obviously, the fall of Assad has created more instability. Sometimes instability is a good thing because it can lead to better days down the road, but the intelligence community assessment does note that a lot of the jihadi groups have not yet been folded into the Ministry of Defense under the new regime. They're playing either a waiting game right now, or they're saying that they don't trust the intentions of the new government there in Syria, and the longer those jihadi groups remain outside the fold and outside the purview, the oversight of the new government there, obviously creates problems not just for that new government of HTS, but also potential unraveling of whatever stability has been built so far there in Damascus. And obviously that's something that Israel is keeping a constant watch over.
Certainly keeping a constant watch. Indeed. Mike, separately, the name Senator Randy Fine is well known in Florida, perhaps not so much globally. A Jewish Republican, he's facing some challenges in the race for a House seat in a deep red district. Tell us more. Why is he in the headlines?
Well, this is a seat that should easily be a Republican. It's a special election that's coming up. Actually, early voting has actually gotten underway. This is for Mike Waltz's old seat there in Florida. Waltz became the national security advisor, resigned that seat. Randy Fine, Jewish Republican, pro-Israel, sort of bombastic. He's had a war of words and actions, for that matter, with Governor Ron DeSantis down there. Apparently not as popular as one would expect within that district, a district that Waltz won going away in his last election, a district that Donald Trump won by some 40 points. Right now, according to the polling there, and polling in the House can, it can often be unreliable because of the small sample size, but the polling shows a neck-and-neck race with an unheralded candidate, a teacher by the name of Josh Wheel, a Democrat, who has outraised Fine exponentially there. It's a concern for Republicans if they lose that seat, that razor-thin majority in the House. There's no razor thin enough to account for what it would look like if Fine were to lose that seat there. There's more money pouring in from the Republican side. They're looking to bail him out, but a lot of Republicans complaining there that Fine isn't doing enough to help his own cause. Should he win, he would become the fourth Jewish Republican in the House in this Congress. But again, it's far from game over there within that race, and very, very troubling there for Republicans, keeping an eye on that one.
On top of all the latest developments in the United States as they happen, thank you so much, senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim at the White House in Washington. Thank you, Mike. And now we can't really talk about U.S. intelligence without delving a little bit deeper into that embarrassing group messaging mistake earlier in the week in which Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, was added to a U.S. administration group discussing U.S. military plans in Yemen in the latest responses, and there have been many. President Donald Trump dismissing the accidental addition of Jeffrey Goldberg to that group, calling it a glitch. Dan Perry is laughing. Tell us why.
It's a hell of a glitch. It's a terrible mistake, and it puts a journalist in both a wonderful position as a journalist, but also a terrible position because are you a citizen first or a journalist first? And the right answer at a journalism school is you're a journalist, and if you know something, you have to report it. But at all cost, maybe not. I mean, sometimes you have to somehow do a judgment call. He, for the longest time, for days after this glitch was discovered, didn't want to say what was there. He sort of danced around it. He was trying to be a citizen first. I think what worries me more than anything is not the glitch / mistake of Jeffrey Goldberg being added. Mistakes will happen, although at some point incompetence, such as we've seen from some quarters of the administration, become a worry. But really the foolishness of Secretary Hegseth and going out to the cameras and saying that there were no plans being discussed there. I mean, lying is one thing, but a lie that can be easily exposed and is likely to be immediately exposed is particularly abysmal. And of course, now they've published the actual text of it, The Atlantic has, and it reveals that indeed, shockingly, on this unsecured channel, they were talking about precise plans, exact targets, times in which planes will take off. It is almost literally unbelievable, as in I can hardly believe it happened. And of course then you have Trump talking about the editor of The Atlantic, one of the most respected publications in America, as a hack journalist who's meaningless. I mean, the absurdity just grows ever more curious.
And of course, Pete Hegseth, when he says nobody was texting war plans, you're saying it's very obvious that was not the case. And he knows television and the media all too well, given the fact that he used to be a Fox News host as well. Jonathan Regev, does somebody need to be axed, fired, as Donald Trump used to do so well on television?
I think so. If this is such a big mistake, then yes. as much as I would love to be added to one of those groups, why you're laughing? we are not supposed to be added.
It would be a terrible dilemma for you.
Yeah, it would be a terrible dilemma. But this is not something that's supposed to happen, and it did happen. So yes, someone has to pay the price. Whether it's the National Security Advisor, maybe if he's the one that did the mistake. I think the answer is yes.
Very quickly, should someone be fired?
Yes, of course someone should be fired, specifically the Secretary of Defense for being this way. But I see a bigger problem, which is that everything about how the administration is handling this suggests such an indifference towards public opinion and towards any kind of norms of how to handle such a situation that it is genuinely disturbing. And it means that they're interested in the opinions of no one but their hardcore base. That is not a way for a government to prosper.
Not a great look at all. Dan Perry, International Affairs Analyst, and Security Analyst Jonathan Regev, thank you both so much for being here in studio. Appreciate it. Thank you for being part of the rundown. And now, still in the United States, the latest on moves to deport Mahmoud Khalil, a Columbia University graduate and pro-Palestinian activist accused of being a Hamas sympathizer. The Trump administration now says his deportation is justified because he did not reveal connections to two organizations in his application to become a permanent U.S. resident. The government says Khalil failed to state on his green card application he had previously worked for the Syria office of the British Embassy in Beirut and was a member of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA. So for more, it's a pleasure to welcome Shai Davidai, Assistant Professor at Columbia University and host of the podcast Here I Am with Shai Davidai. He joins us live from New York. Shai, thank you so much for your time. So,
thank you for having me. Thank you for covering this issue.
Important indeed, and such heated reaction to this case, as you well know, the fate of Mahmoud Khalil. Let's start there. The Columbia student facing deportation. He's accused of conducting activities linked to Hamas, and now these claims that he had hid information when he applied to be a permanent U.S. resident. Now, obviously, everyone is innocent until proven otherwise. That said, what is your take? What kind of reaction are you seeing there in New York?
Well, first, we have to make sure that we get all the terminology and the words right. Mahmoud Khalil is not being detained for deportation because of him being a Hamas sympathizer. In fact, if every person that was a Hamas sympathizer was deported from Columbia University,
there'd be a problem.
We would have very few students and also very few professors, including the entire Department of Middle Eastern Studies. He is being detained for deportation because of his illegal activities on campus and for breaking his conditions of his green card. I know those conditions very well because I too am on a green card in the United States. I am very concerned about everyone's due process, including Mahmoud Khalil's due process. At the same time, I'm not worried that they would come for me because I have never violently taken over a university building, nor do I ever intend to. So putting that aside, what we're seeing now is Khalil becoming or being made into a folk hero. You have basically, instead of people arguing about whether this one specific person violated his conditions of staying in the United States, whether he lawfully conducted himself when applying for the green card, people are making this into an issue that it's unrelated about free speech, about things that completely have nothing to do with the case in hand.
And over and above that, as you say, this is not about free speech, but certainly is being made out to be in many of the U.S. media, international media too, the coverage we are seeing. But there's a separate case also, families of Israeli hostages suing Mahmoud Khalil and other Columbia University protest organizers for allegedly running a Hamas propaganda arm on campus. Unprecedented indeed. Your thoughts on this? What can you tell us?
So I haven't read all of the lawsuit to opine on it. I believe that a judge will give it, its day in court. But we do have to notice a few things that at least are concerning. 4 hours before the beginning of the October 7th massacre, the social media account of the organization that Mahmoud Khalil led on campus became active, reactivated after months of being dormant. And it has a map of the entire state of Israel in Arabic saying, "We are back." Now, I'm not saying that correlation means causation. I'm saying that, of course, we have to assume innocence. But this is something that needs to be at least looked into. How is the organization that has not been active on campus before October 7, and yet right after October 7 immediately jumps into its anti-Israel and anti-American activism, how is it that 4 hours before the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, all of a sudden it becomes reactivated? So I'm glad that this lawsuit is bringing things to light. I hope that an assumption of innocence is still being safeguarded, and we'll have to see what happens.
Well, it certainly would be staggering if organizations in the US knew about the October 7th plans and intelligence and security experts here in Israel had no clue at all. As you say, many questions. We wait to see what those answers look like. Shai, I'd love your take on the kind of feedback that you are getting from Jewish students right now in the United States, not only at Columbia, but on other campuses as well. Are they comfortable going to class? Can they wear yarmulkes or a Star of David? What are young people saying now? What is your sense?
Well, the question of can they and do they is two different questions. Yes, they can. Most students are perfectly safe. They can go to class. In fact, since Mahmoud Khalil was detained, it was 2.5 weeks ago, we have not had one violent takeover of a building on campus. To remind people, the week before he was detained, he oversaw not one, but 2 violent takeovers. So we do see progress. At the same time, I just met on the street, ran into an Israeli student who doesn't tell people he's Israeli until they get to know him better. Why? Because he's afraid he'll be judged before being given a chance to show who he is. So we definitely have prejudice that is happening on campus. It's happening all over the United States on campuses and in Canada. Some Jewish students are leaning into their Jewish identity, wearing their Magen Davids, their hostage pins. A lot of them are choosing to hide it, not because they are afraid for their physical safety, but they're afraid for their friendships, they're afraid for their grades, they're afraid to be focused for verbal harassment and stuff like that.
Certainly is so disturbing to think that that is the case in 2025 in the United States of America. Shai, you mentioned earlier on at least, that if they had to arrest people for being sympathizers to terrorist groups, it could be a problem on campus. The faculty at Columbia University, I understand, has been staging some protests as well over what they call the university's capitulation to Donald Trump's demands. Tell us more. Where were those faculty protests when Jewish students were being targeted on that very same campus?
Yeah, so we have to look at the protests that have been happening on campus by faculty. The core group has been protesting with the Hamas supporters for 17 months. Those are names that everyone now knows: Joseph Massad, Rashid Khalidi, who just retired, Catherine Frank, who's pushed out to retirement, Joseph Howley, Susan Bernofsky, etc. But with them, we have this new group of faculty, who I call them the self-interested, incompetent, coward colleagues of mine, who have said nothing for the past year and a half. But all of a sudden, when the administration is putting its foot down and saying you cannot violate any minority's rights, including based on national origin, including based on religion, all of a sudden they are up in arms. Those faculty are so shameless, because what they're telling people is, we know how to protest. We just didn't care enough when Jews and Israelis were targeted. But when our research funds are being targeted, all of a sudden we care. That's the lowest form of, there's words I cannot say on this show, but it's just so lowly of anyone, especially a professor at a supposedly elite university.
Certainly, the state of academia at these elite colleges seems perplexing when watching from afar. On a slightly more personal note, if you don't mind, I imagine your children would be quite young right now, but would you want to send your children to study at these elite colleges and universities in the United States? Would you think they would be safe?
I don't know if they would be safe. I would preferably not want to send them. I wouldn't want to spend 4 years, sleepless nights wondering what happens to my kids. Can they express their own opinions in class, or are afraid to get a grade not for their abilities, but get a bad grade for their views? Today, tomorrow, this year, I would never send my kids to Colombia. 9 years from now, when my son turns 18, I hope that we have won the fight against terrorism on campus, won the fight against anti-Semitism on campus. And yes, I will be happy to then send both my older son and my younger daughter to places like Colombia.
Hopefully the situation changes long before then, hopefully. Shai Davidai, Assistant Professor at Columbia University and the host of the podcast Here I Am with Shai Davidai, live from New York. Thank you so much for being with us on The Rundown.
Thank you very much for having me.
And that is a wrap for The Rundown for today. I'm Benita Levine in Tel Aviv. Thank you for watching. This is I24 News.
Introducing the brand new I24 News Video On Demand app. You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions and expert commentary, all at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News Video On Demand app today. The 7th of October set in motion a chain of events. Today, Israel's enemies are severely weakened, but not defeated, and the balance of power is shifting. This region never rests. And for its own survival, Israel needs to keep its finger on the pulse. If you want to better understand, if you want to hear voices you won't hear elsewhere, then tune in daily to Middle East Now on I24 News. Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are? Introducing I24 News' brand new news website. On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News app today.
Siempre hemos sido pacíficos.
to Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. I'm Emily Francis. Each week, we're focusing on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interest, both here in Israel and throughout the global Jewish community, the diaspora. And we're starting with our top 5 items in the Jewish world, presented by Sarah Rogers. Hi, Sarah.
Thanks, Emily. Here are the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. A Dutch court has convicted 4 men for their roles in the attacks on Maccabi Tel Aviv fans in Amsterdam last November. The 4 men, aged between 22 and 32, have been sentenced for anti-Semitic threats, attacking the Israeli fans, and pointing out their locations. They have been jailed for between 1 to 3 months in the attacks that Israel called a, quote, pogrom. The US Justice Department has created a new task force designed to prosecute terrorists who were involved in October 7th. Called JTF 10-7, the Justice Department says that they will investigate acts of terrorism by individuals and entities providing support and financing to Hamas, related Iran proxies and their affiliates, as well as acts of anti-Semitism by these groups. This comes amid a crackdown from the Trump administration on college campus protest leaders. A handful of European personalities are boycotting a conference on anti-Semitism set up by the Israeli government itself because of its invitation to European far-right political groups. Individuals including the chief rabbi of the UK, Ephraim Mervis, French intellectual Bernard-Henri Lévy, and ADL chief Jonathan Greenblatt are some of the names that have been pulled out of the conference, citing its inclusion of far-right politicians from France, Spain, and Hungary. This comes as the Israeli Foreign Ministry has been openly reaching out to the pro-Israel far-right parties of Europe. Gal Gadot has become the first Israeli actress to have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. The star of Wonder Woman and the recently released Snow White movie was emotional as she became the 2,804th recipient of the star, saying, quote, "If a girl from Rosh Hashanah can get a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, then anything is possible." Dozens protested the event, citing Gadot's support for her home country and the IDF. And a medieval manuscript, believed to be the oldest Jewish book in the world, is now on display in New York City. The 1,300-year-old book was discovered in Afghanistan in 1997 and was written by Jews who lived among the Buddhists who ruled the Bamiyan Valley. Known as the Afghan Siddur, it features poems, prayers, and the Passover Haggadah. Those are your top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Back to you, Emily.
A monumental election for the 2025 World Zionist Congress in the wake of the October 7th massacre and subsequent war against Hamas. Now, for the first time since 2020, elections are being held for a seat at the table in shaping Israel's future, influencing Jewish communities worldwide and supporting Zionism. And in the first week of voting, twice as many people cast ballots than 5 years ago. And the winning 152 delegates will, from the U.S. will join representatives from all around the world. And we are joined now from New York by Herbert Bloch, the executive director of the American Zionist Movement, which organizes the World Zionist Congress elections. Hello, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me to talk about this.
Yes, this is, I know, a very important election at such a pivotal time in the story of the Jewish people. Please, if you can, explain to our viewers the role. Many know the World Zionist Congress, but not exactly what the role entails. So please share that for us.
So thank you. The Zionist Congress that will meet this October is the 39th World Zionist Congress, continuing directly in the footsteps of the Zionist Congress convened by Theodor Herzl. And the modern Zionist Congress is a global Jewish parliament. It's a grassroots body of 525 delegates elected from around the world, from almost 40 countries, who come together in October every 5 years to set the direction and policy for the national institutions of Israel, the Mosdot Halumim, which are the World Zionist Organization, the Jewish Agency for Israel, Karen Kayemet L'Israel Jewish National Fund, and the Karen HaYesod. And these sort of quasi-governmental institutions that are the link between Israel and the Jewish diaspora worldwide together allocate over $1 billion a year in funding for different projects, and not just funding, but priorities for how those institutions allocate their resources. over the coming years. And American Jews are about a third, the delegates from America are about a third of those at the Zionist Congress, and American Jews have an opportunity to participate in directly electing those representatives. There are 22 different parties running an election that started on March 10th and continues until May 4th. And voting is done online through the American Zionist Movement, AZM, which is the Zionist Federation in the United States. We're the umbrella convening body, and we organize the election in the United States for American Jews.
So obviously, I imagine you're not surprised so far. The turnout just in the beginning it has doubled from the last time. Clearly, things have changed. What does this tell us? Is it a different kind of person than years past? Are we seeing younger people wanting to take on this role in light of all the advocacy that has followed October 7th?
So there are, as I mentioned, 22 different slates. We knew there was greater interest in the last election. There were 14. There are many new parties that have come forward to run in the election. Different segments of the Jewish community that are actively involved. There are more young candidates, many activists from colleges who are involved in different slates. And in general, we're seeing a resurgence of interest in Zionism. You know, while the Jewish people in the state of Israel have been under attack, many people want to rally around our community, around Zionism, and stand up for Zionism and say, you know, this is a moment where I want to be involved. I want to have a say. I want to reaffirm my Zionism and express my opinion. So some of this interest began even before October 7th. There was a lot of interest in the Jewish diaspora and the American Jewish community about debates going on in Israel around the judicial reform and the Kotel and all sorts of other issues, even before October 7th. And obviously, since October 7th, the community has rallied together, and there are a lot more people who are involved in this. I see you're showing a little video in the background there. We do have a video on the AZM website that explains this election and why it's important for people to participate. It takes, less than 5 minutes to vote. It's very easy, and it costs $5, which covers the cost of the election and verification of the voter and processing. And as of now, the turnout is almost double, or excuse me, more than double where it was 5 years ago in this election.
Wow, incredible, and obviously a very pivotal year with a lot of work ahead for the Congress. Thank you very much, Herbert Bloch, the Executive Director of the American Zionist Movement. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
He's a Jewish comedian who continues to find humor even the most challenging times. Modi has been taking his unique shtick on the road, bringing laughs and relief to audiences all over the world.
We recently did 23andMe. It said 99.8% Jewish. That was it. The pie chart was a matzah ball with a toothpick in it. The results came back in Yiddish. Then they give you your health risks. What are my health risks? The hypertension, the cholesterol? No, Nazis and Kanye. That's my health risks.
And we are now so happy to be joined by Modi. Hello, my friend in New York. Good to see you.
How are you? You put a clip on with no laugh track from the audience. So that was probably, it's like someone, let's go see a show with no laughter.
But you don't need a laugh track because you get the live laughs in real time. Obviously, Kanye, I mean, this is not a new clip that we saw. Kanye keeps giving a reason for comedians to come up with stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, not just him, everybody.
Yes.
There's so much happening nonstop. It just doesn't stop. You have to, you can, because anything you do 1 week, the following week, people already forgot about it.
I know. That must be pretty complicated being a comedian, because it's true. Every week is a brand new chapter. So, here you are in a way between two worlds. You got your Jewish comedy, you love Israel, and now here you are with a whole new layer, I guess you could say, in the past few months. So I imagine you're getting a lot of material with what's going on right now.
I'm getting a lot of material. We are on a full new hour from the Know Your Audience show that's already out, and it's called Pause for Laughter because it's exactly what people need now. Or just have with all that you're being bombarded with news and it doesn't. You just don't know what's happening in the ceasefire, no ceasefire. You just need to take a few moments to just laugh. And that's why I like to have our podcast and our Instagram. Whenever you land on our page, there's a laugh. It's not news. It's not anything groundbreaking. It's just easy.
And explain why, I mean, we all know this, but why laughter and sometimes dark humor is a way to get through dark times, so to speak.
I literally have people tell me at the meet and greet after the shows, it goes, before I go to bed at night, I just watch a few of your clips and then I can fall. It's like it takes them, out of the whole world of what's happening around them, or if it is about what's going on in the world, it's with humor and they can laugh and they can share it with their friends. And it's just literally pausing for laughter and however you can do it, comedy, stand up, make it, I always say, be the friend that brings their friends to the comedy show. You know, even if it's not me, go see a comedy show, bring a few friends. It's the best thing you can do.
For sure. Now tell us about your tour. I mean, you're going to be in the States and you're going to be going to Germany. So I know you have a pretty loyal audience there. I mean, how do you make, jokes about back in the day?
Well, we're finishing up a big leg of the Americas, being in America. We just did Los Angeles. We have a few shows left. And then we're going to Manchester, Munich, Geneva, Antwerp, and Warsaw. We'll be performing in Warsaw. It's Warsaw, Poland. This Jewish comedy is coming to Warsaw, Poland.
That is, have you found that sometimes the audiences in these places, it's also healing for them, given the history I mean, are you nervous making these jokes there?
No, I'm never. The audience is going to be amazing, and they speak English, and they're great, and it's just the whole thought of it, not that long ago, 80 years ago, whatever it was, they were collecting us into train stations, and now we're coming together and having comedy night, and there's a Jewish community that's like kind of there, and they're coming to laugh. It's Mashiach energy is what it is.
And I mean, when you are able to travel and go to different places, do you find that each city, each community has its own energy?
Can I tell you something? Whenever we go anywhere, something organic happens. People reach out to us, the head of the community or some restaurant or somebody that says, hey, we have a museum thing happening this week. Why don't you come? Or everywhere we go, any city we go to, from Venice to England and to London and all of that. And there's always something organic happens with my audience. And it's fun. And we post about it and we talk about it and that's like a lot of what the podcast is about. Yeah. And it's great. And it's organic. It's not pushed or forced, Which is so pleasant. Okay, quick, 30 seconds. I have an idea. Why haven't there ever been a comedy jam? You get Kanye, you get Chappelle, and let's just have a debate through comedy. Has anyone thought of that before? I always think about that, and I always think that the comedian should be running stuff. And there is an Iranian comedian that I think that I'll be doing a show with, and that's just it, just like bringing that energy together of just comedy as like I always said, and I've said it on this show, the Knesset, the Congress, all the governments, when they begin, they should start with 5 minutes of comedy, and then start their arguing and debating. And imagine in the Knesset, right before they start screaming at each other, just somebody just doing 5 minutes of comedy, or maybe challenge one of the Knesset members to do it, and just. That's what it is.
Not a bad idea.
I strongly suggest now, and I really suggest making comedy a part of your life. Go see comedy shows, especially mine, and the tickets are on my website. And there's always some show near you, or let your friend know who's near one of my shows. That hey, go see this show. Bring a little laughter into your life, and it's so good.
Clearly, the best medicine. Modi, thank you so much. Good to see you next year in Israel. It's been a grueling few months for Los Angeles after multiple fires left thousands without homes and without their nostalgic possessions, which were left in ashes. Well, now the LA chapter of the National Council of Jewish Women has banded together to help those who need not only the basic essentials, but also the things that make us happy. I-24 News correspondent Joe Brown has the story.
Providing relief for those who lost everything.
We've been collecting donated goods, both new and gently used, and doing an enormous amount of sorting to really put the best goods that we received here so that folks who have been impacted by the fires can benefit directly from all this support from the community and really feel the love of Los Angeles.
A brand new 20,000 square foot fire relief center has opened up in Altadena, Southern California, to help people who were affected by the Eaton fire that ravaged Los Angeles in January this year. Set up by the LA chapter of the National Council of Jewish Women, the Relief Fund will be selling essentials such as toiletries and hygiene products, but will also allow those who lost their homes, possessions or jobs in the fire to shop in comfort.
I think a lot of donated goods, people receive bags of things that may or may not fit and may or may not accommodate their own style. And here we're hoping people can have an experience that feels warm and normal and really helps them to start to feel like things are the same as they were or that they can be again.
It also adds an air of normalcy in these tricky times.
The importance of doing it now versus a couple months ago is at that time, people maybe got some things that they needed urgently, a couple outfits to wear, but they have to replace an entire closet and for their children and for their spouses and partners. And that's what we're trying to do here.
The center will remain open for a month and has been heavily relying on kind donations from the public.
Jews around the world recently celebrated Purim, a holiday of dressing up in costumes and experiencing joy. And this year, a special exhibition in Ferrara, Italy, is showing how history is coming full circle in an amazing way. A rare illustrated Queen Esther scroll that was inscribed in the northern Italian city over 400 years ago has come home. Joining us now from Ferrara, Italy, is Amedeo Spagnoletto, the director of the National Museum of Italian Judaism and the Shoah. He's also one of the curators of the exhibition Bellissima Esther. Buongiorno.
Buongiorno to you, Emily, and all the people who are seeing us.
We're very happy to have you joining us. I know that the museum is a labor of love. It took several years to build. It's still quite new. Tell us about the museum and why a lot of the unknown history of the Italian Jews notable over millennia. Tell us more.
We established the museum at the end of the 2017 with a very important exhibition devoted to the first 1,000 years of the permanence of the Jews here in Italy. That records from the 2 centuries before the normal era. But right now, in these 5 years that we passed, we are almost to the 8 years of the activities of our museum. We had a very important exhibition devoted to the ghetto era and also to the Renaissance era, because it's so important, Ferrara, with this crucial period of the Renaissance that is in the same case connected also with this Megillah that was illuminated by Moshe Poscarolo, and now is one of the most important loan that we had in this important exhibition devoted to Purim.
It really is so beautiful. I know it's ironic. It was made there, and it's been in the National Library in Israel, and now, they're loaning it. So on loan was something that generated from there, and you're right. You think of the Renaissance, people equate Florence and, Venice, but Ferrara was a very important center for publishing, and the Jews were very involved in that craft, correct?
Yes, exactly. From the middle period, the Jews settled here in Ferrara, but the most important period of their presence here in Ferrara was connected with the house of Este, when in the beginning of the 60th centuries, all the Marranos and the Sephardic people, very, very many people coming from Spain and Portugal came here, welcomed by the House of Esten, and was the centuries when there was a very brilliant permanence and also producing. You spoke about the House of Publishing for perhaps you mentioned you wanted to speak about the Usque family who published the very, very well important edition of the Bible translated in Spanish, and was also thanks to one figure that operated here just for a couple of years, 3 years, that was Gracia Nassi.
Yep.
That that was a Marranos, and after, came back to the Judaism when he settled here in Italy, in Venice, and after in Ferrara, coming at the end to Istanbul, and was an interpreter, very, very important with her family.
She was such an important figure. Also, the Ferrara Bible, it was the first Sefer Torah in Ladino that was actually made in Ferrara as well, yeah?
Yes, was in Spanish languages, and is very, very, very well. And we have one copy here in Ferrara at the city library, and we had it for a while here in the museum.
Let's quickly talk, because we're almost out of time, and this is for another era. But listen, Jewish people have been in Italy since Roman times, some say before. Why is it so important, the fact that it's a national museum in the country which we've seen a lot of anti-Semitism has also been supportive of this institution? Explain why that's very important.
Of course, this institution is very, very important also to fight concretely the anti-Semitism, and specifically in this period, I want to underline a lot of schools coming here to know better or to come across a knowledge about the presence of the Judaism here in Italy. Because here in Italy, there are a lot of, just a couple of important communities, but the presence of and also the synagogues and cemeteries of the Jewish are present in very, very important places here in Italy. And through our museum, the people, and especially the alums, the schools, the classes can come across with a new knowledge that bring them to understand the presence of the Judaism here in Italy, and also to behave better through the Jews.
All right, God willing. All right, thank you so much, Amadeo Spagnoletto. Much appreciated, and we'll see you in Ferrara soon. I'm coming.
I wait all the audience coming here in Ferrara to see the museum and the city. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Ciao.
Ciao.
Now turning to an amazing organization, Shalva. It's based in Israel that provides care programs for children with all kinds of disabilities. And it started in a small apartment with 8 children, and it's now celebrating its 35th anniversary with a huge gala in New York, raising millions of dollars. I-24 News correspondent Nicole Zedek was at the celebration and filed this report.
Here in New York City, more than 500 guests have gathered for a very special occasion, the 35th anniversary of Shalva, the Israeli Association for the Care and Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities. 35 years ago, this organization started as a small operation. In fact, I spoke to the founder and president of how it all got started. Here's what he had to say.
Began 35 years ago as a result of my own son's medical problem at the age of 11 months. He became blind and deaf. Everybody wrote him off. And at the age of 8, he had a miraculous breakthrough to communication, the Helen Keller breakthrough. And my wife had made a promise that if God ever helps her son, she'll dedicate her life to helping other mothers with their children. And she turned to me and said, I made a promise, God delivered, it's payback time. We started a couple of years later with 5 children, and here we are 35 years later serving 2,000 families, parents every week.
It's truly amazing to see exactly how they've grown over the past 35 years. In fact, I also spoke to one of the chairmen of the organization who gave me an example of one of the families that they've been able to help just recently, in fact. Take a listen.
My friend who just made Aliyah from Brazil has a 3.5-year-old daughter who is on the spectrum, has a disability, and he said he and his wife went from a very unhappy life in Brazil to a happy life in Israel because of Shalva. Because Shalva gives them the ability to live their lives with help.
Tonight alone, this 35th anniversary gala has raised more than $3 million to all go straight into the Shalva organization. And there's one guest of honor here tonight as well who has a big name for herself, Montana Tucker. She actually visited the Shalva house in Israel when she was there last. She said it was one of the most amazing experiences for her as well.
My experience at Shalva when I went to Israel was truly unforgettable. I probably mentioned this in my speech tonight, but from the second I walked in there, I had a smile on my face the entire time. The way that the staff cares for every single person there, and you can tell that all of the people there love all of the staff so much, and you can tell it's an unconditional love and support of one another. And I'm honored that I got a chance to dance with some of the kids there, and they say that I brought them joy, but truly they brought me joy.
So you can see and hear truly the amazing work that this organization has been doing over the past 35 years, and they continue to grow, really expanding their grasp not only in Israel, not only in the United States, but all throughout Europe as well, as the organization does aim to help as many people as they can and families with disabilities as well. Reporting in New York City for I-24 News, I'm Nicole Zedek.
And that is all for this week's episode of Jewish World Weekly. Please head over to I-24 News' YouTube channel to catch up on this episode and previous episodes. Thank you so much for watching. We sure hope you enjoyed. And shalom from Tel Aviv until we see you next time.